Spoof. A humorous imitation of something, typically a film or a particular genre of film, in which its characteristic features are exaggerated for comic effect. Example: I spoofed my pants. The art of making a spoof is a craft that very rarely gets the recognition it deserves. It's a very difficult task, but in the last 20 years, no one's really been able to do it correctly. But 20 years before that, 40 years ago, there was a man by the name of Mel Brooks giving us some of the best parody spoof films of all time. Movies like Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, Robin Hood Men in Tights, and our topic for today's video, Spaceballs. Spaceballs is a parody of a certain film franchise called Star Wars, a little obscure thing, I'm sure not many of you have heard of it, and it follows the story of Lone Star and his sidekick Barf as they go to rescue the Princess of Druidia, Vespa, from the evil Spaceballs. For those of you that don't know, George Lucas is very open to the idea of people spoofing his work. He really likes it, in fact. He's done it with Phineas and Ferb, he's done it with Family Guy, he's done it with Robot Chicken, but Spaceballs is a different story. George Lucas signed off on someone making a feature-length film just spoofing Star Wars. That is a guy who is okay with someone poking fun at his work. And if he's going to choose anyone, Mel Brooks is probably the guy he should pick for a spoof of Star Wars. But what makes Spaceballs such a great spoof? Well, believe it or not, there's actually 5 things that make it such a great spoof. And we'll be going over those 5 points today in the first and only episode of The Art of the Spoof with Mr. Cow. Spaceballs Edition. .com. Okay, here's the way I personally think of parody movies. Here's the way I personally think of spoofs. There is a thin line right here. You're building a house. The house is the movie. Get where I'm going? The foundation of the house is the story in a spoof. And it's a very thin line. It doesn't have to be anything other than a hard, rock-solid surface underneath. That's all the foundation's got to be. It's on a nice level piece of land. Maybe there's already concrete underneath it that's set and not cracked or anything. I don't know how houses are made. It's an analogy. Is it a simile? It's an analogy. Anyways, on top of that foundation is a house. Inside of that house is all the comedy, all the parody, all the humor, everything else that's happening in the movie that doesn't have to do with the story. That part's going to be gigantic because it's a spoof. It's a comedy movie. But that thin line underneath needs to be perfectly solid throughout the entirety of the movie, because if there's a crack, that's going to hurt some of the jokes and bring them down slightly, because then your movie is not moving. The story is not moving forward. Now, Spaceballs does a fantastic job with this. Not only is the story always moving, but it's not half bad of a story. I think it's a really solid save the princess in a sci-fi setting story. Sure, it's goofy and its characters are goofy and the whole essence of the movie is goofy, but you can't deny that the story is coherent and makes sense throughout the entirety of the movie, and it's always moving forward. So when it comes time for a joke, when something comes up, when there's a reference that's going to happen to either pop culture or just anything in general, because it's a spoof, there's a lot of references, but we'll get to that point in just a little bit. Anytime that happens, the story keeps moving underneath it. So you're engaged in the story, but also laughing at the comedy on top of it. That's what Spaceballs does so perfectly. Not only is it a good story, but it's also moving throughout the entirety of the movie, making a nice solid structure for our little house of comedy placed on top. Setting the tone is something you have to do in every movie, but for a spoof, it's a little bit more difficult, because you need to make it very clear on what kind of spoof this is going to be. There are some spoofs that play things really straight and really seriously. I would say Young Frankenstein is kind of that sort of movie, where everything's kind of serious feeling, but it's all really goofy while it's happening, and it's, laughable. It's all about the reactions with Gene Wilder. That's the kind of movie that Young Frankenstein is. It takes itself somewhat seriously. Spaceballs does not, And they do a fantastic job of conveying that really early on in the movie by using a fourth wall break. Now, for those of you who don't know, the fourth wall is basically, the way I always say it, is just the TV screen. You can see through it, the people on screen cannot. It's there, and whenever someone addresses you or does something to make you realize it's a performance, like talk to you directly, that is breaking that supposed fourth wall. That's all it is. So, in an exposition dump at the start of the movie, where they're just explaining the entire plot, this happens.
Air shield. We will, sir. Once we kidnap the princess, we can force her father, King Roland, to give us the combination to the air shield, thereby destroying planet Druidia and saving planet Spaceball. Everybody got that?
Darth Helmet straight up just turns to the audience and says, "You got that? Alright, cool, we're gonna keep moving forward." Because the story is kind of secondary to the parody. That's phenomenal. I can't think of a better way to set the tone for this movie. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is a perfect fourth wall break. It does exactly what it needs to do. It serves a purpose on top of being a pretty funny moment. The purpose of it is to make it clear that the story in this movie, it's out there now, you know it, now just sit back and enjoy all the goofy stuff that's going to be happening as it goes along. Because Spaceballs is kind of, I wouldn't say intimidating at first, but it is really, really goofy. And it may make people think, oh, this is just stupid. But they know that. They know it's stupid. They're just like, look, it's a dumb, goofy movie. You got the story. Just sit back and enjoy it. That is the perfect way to set the tone for a movie like Spaceballs. I can't think of a better way to do it. I really can't. For setting the tone, Spaceballs nailed it. References definitely have their place in spoofs, and Spaceballs is no stranger to references. There are plenty in this movie. But to be completely honest, you never know if your references are going to become outdated or not. Spaceballs got really lucky that most of their references, except for maybe the Chew Your Gum one, which was a reference to an old gum commercial, are still pretty relevant to this day. Pizza the Hut? Yeah, Pizza Hut. That's a reference. That's a reference to a brand. Perrier Air, Perrier Rary, whatever the hell that brand's called, is still here. And that was a pretty funny bit. A lot of them were just funny little references or references to other sci-fi movies that fit within the genre, fit within the story somewhat. They had something to do and they had an actual meaning for being there. They weren't just references for the sake of references. There is one movie that I believe has done the worst job ever with references, and I feel like I need to bring it up just to put Spaceballs in an even better light for how they use their references, because basically all of them serve a purpose. The only one I can really think of that was a little bit diverting from the story was the alien chestbuster scene. But even that one was just one reference that was completely out of left field, that was goofy and weird, and then they went right back to the story. So I'm okay with one of those, or maybe even two of those coming up in a movie. But other than that, all the references were really solid. The movie I'm thinking of that did everything wrong with their references is The Starving Games, a parody of the Hunger Games. Now, full disclosure, I did see this movie 6 to 7 years ago when it first came out. I was the target demographic back then, and I thought it sucked balls. Right now, I also think it sucks balls. Now, here are just the references from the trailer. Alright, just from the trailer. I'm going to read them out to you and explain why none of these work. And I think once I read them, you'll realize why. In the trailer, there is an Angry Birds reference, a Fruit Ninja reference, an Avatar reference, a Lord of the Rings reference, a Gangnam Style reference, an LMAFO reference, an Avengers reference, and a fucking Tim Tebow reference. Yeah, remember that quarterback for the Broncos? No? Then who cares? That's the problem with some of these references, is that they're just incredibly outdated. They were just trends at the time that they were trying to capitalize on for money. But honestly, if they're used in a clever way, who cares? None of them are used in a clever way. The movie constantly stops just to make a reference. The movie is basically a string of references all slapped together, and none of them are funny. The only time the movie has even the slightest amount of hope is when it is actually parodying the Hunger Games. Then you might get close to getting a laugh. But when most of the movie is just a string of useless, stupid references, and that's the focal point, your movie's ruined. Your spoof is stupid, and doesn't make sense, and isn't funny. I just wanted to bring this up, because this movie scarred me, and I feel like it should scar all of you also. So go check it out. But first, check out Spaceballs. When you're parodying something like Star Wars that has such a massive fan base, you can expect there might be a little bit of pushback when you parody it, but Spaceballs seems to be pretty universally loved by a lot of Star Wars fans. And I think that's because Mel Brooks really treated the series with respect. He didn't overdo anything, nothing was malicious, nothing was like making fun of the creators or the audience that enjoys it. It was just poking fun at some of the aspects of Star Wars and sci-fi movies in general, and having a goofy, fun time with it. That's what a spoof should be. It needs to be respectful of the source material. But Spaceballs definitely had it easier than some other films because Spaceballs had basically the consent of George Lucas to do what they wanted. George Lucas loves the idea of people spoofing Star Wars, like a lot. He thinks that's hilarious. In fact, he's on record as saying Spaceballs is hilarious. I don't know if that's a direct quote, actually. Don't quote me on that. But it is on record that he enjoys Spaceballs, I should say. I can't find the exact clip or anything like that, but it is on record that he did say that at some point. He enjoys these parodies. He enjoys these spoofs. That's fantastic, and that must have made it fairly easy for Mel Brooks to go in and say, like, look, we can do what we want. We can joke around with it. Nothing malicious, nothing hateful, nothing like that. It's just a good, goofy time trying to make people laugh. And I feel like George Lucas recognizes that, and that's why he enjoys the idea so much. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He doesn't take his creation too seriously. If people want to joke around about it, they should be allowed to joke around about it. And Mel Brooks does a fantastic job of respecting the source material, respecting the audience, and putting together something that both pays homage to Star Wars and makes fun of it at the same time, with its great story that actually works as a story, and a bunch of fantastic jokes. And speaking of jokes, yeah, this one, this point might be somewhat of a given, but your spoof should be funny. In the last 20 years or so, not many people have accomplished that. They've done really well at making it goofy and stupid, but funny is not one of the aspects that spoofs are known for in the last few years. It's just really not. I don't know why, honestly. I don't know why the other companies, other creators can't accomplish it. I'm sure there are plenty of small projects that have, but in the mainstream, there's not a whole lot. Not a whole lot of people are doing it super well. That being said, it still is really impressive how funny Spaceballs is. Almost 40 years later, 30 years later, right around that area, it's ridiculous. I'm still laughing at this movie today. Many people are. It is a genuinely funny movie. Even if you don't like Star Wars, you've never seen Star Wars, sure, some of the stuff might go over your head, but there are still parts that I think people could watch and enjoy. Now, of course, not everyone's gonna laugh at everything. Not everyone has the same sense of humor. This is definitely a point that's more of my opinion. I feel like the jokes that are put together in Spaceballs, the references, how everything plays out, makes for a really funny and enjoyable and entertaining movie. If you disagree with me on this point, that's fine, but you can still agree that it is a point of emphasis for a spoof. It's gotta be funny if it's a comedy, and I think Spaceballs pulls that off just fine. Well, I hope you enjoyed our look back at Spaceballs and the art of the spoof and what it really takes to make one of these movies work. There have been a lot of failed attempts in recent years, but I don't think spoofs are dead. I think there is still a possibility that some creators can make spoofs of films that are still funny. Maybe not the creators of movies like The Starving Games, or Epic Movie, or Disaster Movie, even though those are all the same two guys. They're ruining it, but I think there is still a chance for parody movies to make a big comeback and be in the mainstream, especially with them having such a long lifespan like Spaceballs, or basically anything Mel Brooks does. The guy is incredibly funny, incredibly talented. He is someone to look up to, an incredible creator. But with that all being said, I guess I'll see you all next time. I understand this video took a little bit longer to get here than it usually does. But it's a big one. It's a movie I care a lot about, and I wanted to make sure I did right by it when talking about the things I enjoyed in it and how to make a spoof. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like and subscribe to become a cow, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.